for our first speech, we're going to have Amber.
Imagine being trapped in a raging inferno with nowhere to go. There's over 20,000 people on the roads. You're all trapped in your cars. This is how the residents of Paradise, California felt during the campfire that happened on November 8th, 2018. Learning about effective ways to prepare for a wildfire and having a plan as a family can help you in a situation like this. This topic is incredibly personal to me because I was born and raised in Paradise, California. My whole family is pretty much from there and still lives there in that area to this day. There was over 26,000 residents in Paradise at its peak, most of which were retirees and young families. Paradise is always going to be a big place and a big part of who I am. My kids were born there, I was married there, and it's somewhere that's very important to me. So today I want to inform you on the campfire, which is the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. It caused 85 fatalities, one person still missing today. And many of you indicated when I told you that you knew or had briefly heard about the campfire, but do you guys know how that fire started? California, Northern California particularly where this area is at, was under a red flag warning that day due to severely high winds. They were supposed to have shut the power lines off to prevent things like this from happening, but it was made an executive decision last minute to not shut those lines off. And kind of on a side note, one of my best friends, her husband, was actually one of the people that was at the site where the fire started and was told last minute not to shut the lines off. So that's kind of a hard thing to be directly involved in something like that and not really have any control over it, and then to see the devastation that happened. One of the things that contributed to the spread of the fire and why the conditions were so dangerous that day is, according to Ron Wong Lin, there was low rainfall that year in California. And this area in particular usually sees by November about 5 inches of rain, but that year there was less than 1/7 of an inch of rain. So it was very severe drought conditions, and coupling that with the high winds and the heat is really what kind of got this fire going. So at 6:29 a.m. is when a faulty ignition line in the town of Polga, which is 7 miles southeast of Paradise, sparked and started this fire. So the fire traveled with about 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts at its peak to Paradise, which again, like I said, 7 miles southeast by 8 o'clock that morning. If you're looking at it in perspective, 7 miles may not seem that far, but it had to go up and over mountain ridges in order for that to happen. So it was actually a really, really far distance. So the rapid spread of the fire is what led to the complete and total devastation and destruction that happened. It also meant that most of the residents had zero warning, had no time to prepare for the fire that was headed their way. And by the time that they got on with 911 or were able to contact somebody, the fire was literally out at their back door. They had no time. According to Priyanka Bhavani, the fire at its peak traveled 80 football fields per minute. If you think about how large a football field is, imagine in just 1 minute's time going 80 times over. It's incredibly shocking. So the day of the fire, there were 4 areas in town that were at the most risk, and what I mean by that is there's the town is surrounded on both sides by canyons. So the side of the town where the fire was coming through the canyon, there's 4 zones in that area that the fire was rapidly approaching, and they received 0 evacuation orders. There was a 6-mile stretch of town that got absolutely no warning, no evacuation orders, and a 4-mile stretch that received warning but no evacuation orders, and they actually didn't even get their evacuation orders until 7 hours after the fire had happened and had been gone through, and by that time the town was already gone. So the events that happened that day were just completely unprecedented. The conditions, the amount of people in town, the fact that the roads were so narrow and so small, there was only 2 main roads out of town. There was really nowhere for anybody to go. Vehicles were trapped. People were literally getting out of their cars and running for their lives. the conditions created basically a perfect storm. Something that Paradise can take years, if not decades, to recover from, if it ever even does. And according to the state of California, the fire destroyed 90% of the town, including over 14,000 residences. Yet people have still decided to return home. The fire burned over 150,000 acres over almost 240 square miles. A year after the fire, there was about 3,000 to 4,000 people that had returned home. Most of them were living either in tents or shacks they had built on their decimated land, or in trailers that they rented or borrowed from friends or family. So, like I said, people are returning home. This kind of shows here the decimation, the destruction that happened, and then you can see the rebuild of a new house here in the background just amid all of that chaos. So it really just looks like a war zone with new houses popping up here and there. By July 2019, the first house was rebuilt in Paradise, and it took that amount of time for the permits to go through. People were applying for permits almost immediately, but it took until July for them to actually be able to get one and successfully build a house. And then by March 2020, there were 68 homes rebuilt. So as I close this speech, I want to take a moment to remember where I'm from. One of the things that I brought to show you guys is this piece of wood, and it's a piece of wood that was taken from a fallen tree that was burned in the fire. So today we talked about the Camp Fire and how it was the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. We talked about how that fire started. We talked about the conditions of that fire, what led to the rapid spread, how people went through the evacuations, and then talked a little bit about the rebuild. So imagine being trapped somewhere, having nowhere to go. Your town's on fire. What would you do? Thank you.